Hey, so before I get too far into things, I want to give you a heads up about a couple folks that you're going to see up around us in the near future. And I know it might be weird for me walking around, just get used to that for today anyway. Somehow, some way, 3 individuals who are all very highly qualified with a lot of experience have literally dropped into our lap at Crosswalk. And I'm very excited about that, and I want you to get to know them in time. The first one is related to a crosswalker, and that is Jenny and Art Matheny. They are Karen Kenny's daughter and husband. And Art had a church. He was planted a church up in Oregon, and for a bunch of different reasons, they decided to close down that ministry and look for something in the Bay Area, which they are. And so they're on the hunt, living up at the lake with Karen. And anyway, he's working on his D-Min in spiritual direction, which is awesome. She's finishing up her PhD in Old Testament, which is awesome. So I want to use them. So you're going to be hearing, probably look forward to something from Jenny in the near future on, bad girls of the Old Testament kind of stuff, because she really knows her stuff. And I think it will be incredible. If you've ever met Art and Jenny, they are the most bubbly, lively. They kind of give Carrie Nuccio a run for her money on friendliness. So, so really great people. So hopefully they'll be teaching. And I told Art, part of his doctor ministry is he has to do a practical part of what he's learned and help people actually do it. And so I told him we would be guinea pigs for that. So if some of you like to explore that a little bit with him, there'll be more to come on that. But I totally trust him, and I think it will be a great experience. So that's coming. And then another guy, about a month ago today, just literally fell out of the sky. His name is Sam Altus, and you'll be seeing more of him. He actually helped me set up the worship center this week, which was helpful. His wife is finishing up her PhD in clinical psychology, and she's doing her internship out at Napa State. Turns out he was a pastor on staff. He's a Fuller Seminary grad out of SoCal. He was on staff at a church in Indianapolis, and he's just hanging out with her for a year. So he's doing some jobs here, and we're talking about, hey, how can we use you here? And he's totally on board. He's theologically aligned with us, which is very rare. So I'm very excited about that. Anyway, so you'll be hearing from them as well, but this is kind of what I'm thinking as pastor here is, what are we going to do with this gift of 3 incredibly talented, educated, experienced people, and I don't want to blow it. So anyway, look for them to come. You'll get to hear some new voices other than mine all the time, which is always good, at least for me, and I think for you too, and it'll be great. One last little shout out goes to Lauren, right there, for helping out with communion today. So what's going to happen, we're going to do communion at the end of my teaching today. I'm going to walk you through it. And one person from your table is going to need to come up and get the elements and take them back. And so the rule is, you might have to do this between now and then, is nobody sits at a table alone. So you need to find find a friend at another table. That's fine, that's cool. But just make sure you're with somebody in this, because it's communal, so that's important. And if you're new to Crosswalk, the table's open to everybody, so you don't have to be a member here. You don't have to sign off on any belief statement. In fact, today I'm taking an interesting nuance on it, which I think is fair and appropriate, and I think it'll actually be helpful and healing for you. So it's open to everybody. So Chris, go ahead and bring up my stuff, and let's take a look at this first quote. This comes from Richard Rohr, chapter 4, called Cleansing the Lens. As we observe our mental and emotional flow over a period of disciplined time, we recognize that we largely create our own experiences. I know this is embarrassing and some of us deny it, but it's true. We have the power to decide what each moment means and how we will respond to it. We largely create our own experiences. So first, let me just say right out of the gate that if you are a person who has been abused, or you're in a relationship where there is abuse going on, what this is not saying is that you are responsible for the abuse going on. That's not what's being said here. What is being said is when things happen to us, we have our responsibility in ways of understanding how we're going to respond, react to the things that happen to us. And often bad things are difficult for us to respond appropriately to. So if you're in that spot, don't hear me say, like you've already heard from the person abusing you, that it's your fault. That's not what this is about. This has to do with how you respond to what's happened to you, good and bad. So my question for you is, why in the world would this reality be embarrassing? He says, I know this is embarrassing, and some of us may deny it, but it's true. He's saying this thing, as we observe our mental and emotional flow over a period of disciplined time, we recognize that we largely create our own experiences. Why would that be embarrassing? Anybody? Oh, okay, feel like you should be over it. That's really good. Yeah, really fair. Okay. What else?
I don't want to have the experiences I'm owning. I don't want to have those part of my own self-portrait, that I own that. You know, it's embarrassing.
Okay. Keep the past in the past, right? Keep it under the rug? Yep. Yep. Okay. Think it's our fault? Yep, for sure. Yep, we all struggle with that. I was telling a story to somebody, I made up a story actually, to a couple I was helping work through some conflict management stuff. And I said, this is what happened. Bob and Bonnie were boyfriend and girlfriend. They're in a relationship. They love each other. Bonnie calls or texts Bob Friday during the day, hey, what are we doing tonight? You want to go see a movie or something? And usually Bob responds, you know, within minutes, but he doesn't respond. So Bonnie, you know, first gets a little worried, just, oh, maybe he's busy or whatever, but time passes, no response from Bob. So she shoots another text, hey, what's going on? Why don't you respond to my text? Just wanted to see if you want to grab dinner and a movie tonight or something. Bob does not respond. Bonnie starts to get a little ticked off. What's up, Bob? Why aren't you returning my text? And so finally, evening starts to come on, dinner hour's there, no Bob, no contact from Bob. So Bonnie's starting to get a little upset. What, are you just going to go have a night with the boys and not tell me about it? You know, how dare you? And so finally, toward the end of the night, Bonnie shoots off another text and says, Bob, I can't believe you were so insensitive not to let me know what you were thinking or what's going on. I thought you loved me. I thought you valued our relationship, but now I'm just not so sure. I don't know if we're going to be able to get over this hurdle. And the next day, Bonnie finally sees Bob. Bob is just happy as all get out to see Bonnie because he loves her. He can tell that something is wrong. So immediately, Bonnie lays into him verbally the same assault that she texted him the evening before. And after she gets done, Bob just simply says to Bonnie, hey, Bonnie, I'm so sorry. I dropped my phone in the toilet last night, and it's not working yet. That's creating your own experiences. Jumping to conclusions when you really don't have all the information available. And what happened, anybody ever done anything similar to that before? Not the drop the toilet thing, but the other thing. Yeah. Where we jump to conclusions about that's why they're reacting that way. We fill in the blanks on them, and it's all us. Sometimes it has absolutely nothing to do with them. We put innuendo, we put motive all over the place. And guess what that means? That means we have 10 times as more to clean up after the fact, as if we would have just chilled out and paid attention to what reality was. I'm going to show you a clip of a movie about a guy who got stuck. And this movie that I'm going to give you two clips from today, one at the beginning, one toward the end, is from an animated film from Disney. And it actually, even though it's an animated film, it's really a grown-up film. And in fact, I think it's such a good film that if you want to come to my Bible study at 11 this Wednesday, I'm going to show you the whole thing. It's an hour and a half. We probably won't talk at all about today. We're just going to watch the movie because it's so good. So just trust me on that. It'll be fun, heartwarming, and delightful. Come at 11. Let me know on your clue in so I know what room we should get ready for. But it's such a good movie. The movie's called Up, and it features the story of Carl and a little boy, but the part I want to focus on is between Carl and Ellie. Carl was this goofy kid just walking around kind of inside his own shell, and he stumbles across a little girl named Ellie, who is larger than life, who loves adventures, full of joy and passion, and she coaxes Carl into her schemes and adventures. And before Carl realizes it, he's knee-deep in a relationship with her. We don't really know what happened all the way through, but we know that things progressed all the way until we start to see the memory flashback in this next slide. Check it out. Every time I see that scene, I get a little teary. In 4 minutes, somehow they were able to capture a lifetime. And after this event, you don't see it until you see the whole movie, but Carl got stuck. He wanted to keep things just as they were. He wanted to keep the house just as it was. He'd go sit down in his seat where Ellie would be beside him, and they were going to be growing old together. But as is the case, life doesn't go as we planned. And they had plans of going to Peru and going to whatever this falls thing was, Paradise Falls, and it didn't work out. And some of you have lived this story, and it's hard. And so I'm wondering, have you ever struggled to move forward after a difficult season? Death is certainly one of those. Maybe it's our parent, maybe it's a spouse. And there are other things that get us stuck in life. And I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind telling me a little about what those things were. What kinds of things get us stuck? Good and bad. Yeah.
Children aging and moving out of the house and then not quite knowing how to go about grabbing onto life again, you know, like
Yeah.
after spending 24/7 taking care of other people.
All right.
Who are you after that?
Right there with you. One more year. That's me, man. Thanks for reminding me. Appreciate that. Anybody else? Losing a loved one, yeah, for sure. Yep. What else? How about divorce? Yeah. Divorce hits. A lot of people get stuck. And actually what happens a lot is no learning's done after divorce. Yeah, right.
I just wanted to say, you
Yeah.
mentioned expectations earlier, and I think sometimes religious expectations get us really stuck.
Very good. Yeah, very good. So we have religion. Religion gets in the way sometimes instead of is helpful. Yeah, takes us down instead of lifting us up, especially in something like divorce, which usually is horribly understood in terms of what the Bible's actually saying. That's right. And that doesn't help at all. So it's hard enough to go through the end of a relationship, then the place of faith, which is supposed to help you through, actually puts you down rather than helping you through. Our church doesn't do that, by the way. With Lauren and Lisa and their ministry, we're great at that, I think, because of them. You know, it's not always bad stuff either. Sometimes it's health, you know, that gets us in the way and we get stuck. And I asked the next question, how did you control things to make sure you didn't move forward? Well, it's that kind of thing. Carl kept his house exactly the same. Divorced people don't want to deal with their stuff because they don't want to. It's painful, it's hard. Why would you want to do that? Don't spend any time on that. If it's an illness, let's just not talk about the illness. Let's pretend it's not there. I have a friend whose sister out on the East Coast had multiple strokes and did not want to go to the doctor because she didn't want to deal with her dependency issues. And she knew as soon as she went in the hospital, she'd have to get clean. So she'd rather not deal with an incredibly urgent medical situation to keep something else going. We do that in different ways. You know, happy occasions too do this. It's not just dark, depressing stuff. Sometimes, have you ever met anybody, maybe at a high school reunion, some years, you know, past graduation, and you find out that there's one or two people from your graduating class that haven't quite yet left high school, right? Maybe they were the, you know, sort of the caricature is the high school football star, right? That his glory days were in high school. He never quite lived up past that. Wouldn't it be sad to peak at 17 years old? You got the whole rest of life, man. But we do that, and sometimes we keep that alive, and we keep our image of those things alive. How do we not keep those things from holding us back? Because they will. Unless we're doing something about it, those things will hold us back even though they need to provide something to go forward. Well, there was a practice that Jesus was involved with, and it's recorded in every gospel which recorded his life. Is that a real bird or a phone? We get real birds in here now and then. Let me know if he's getting near me to attack or something. He's probably seeing this. He's like, I want communion too. Well, Jesus integrated something into his life of balance that made a huge difference for him. And it's on the next screen. Let's check it out. Before daybreak, this is from Mark's Gospel, right at the very beginning of Mark's Gospel. Before daybreak the next morning, Jesus got up and went out to an isolated place to pray. So right before this, if you read it, Jesus was heavily engaged in ministry. He was teaching a bunch, he was healing people, and he needed rest. Most of the time he spent his time in 3 different zones. He spent his time with crowds, doing crowd kind of stuff. He spent his time with disciples, pouring into their lives, and then he would spend time alone like this. So recognize what's happening here. This is before daybreak, so the boys are asleep. And he decides he needs quiet space because he knows as soon as they wake up, it's not going to be quiet anymore. And I just want to help you see how significant this is. We live in 2016, and we would say to ourselves, oh, if only it were simpler times and we didn't have so many distractions. We probably are the most distracted culture in the history of humanity, probably, I would guess that. But isn't it interesting that a person 2,000 years ago also struggled to keep his balance and knew that if he didn't integrate quiet time into his world, he'd probably get run over by life. And also I want you to notice who this person is who's breaking away into silence. It's Jesus. Jesus had it together, didn't he? If Jesus needed time away in quiet, I wonder if that might suggest that you and I might benefit from time away in quiet. Speaks volumes to me. And I also want to just show you one other thing. That when Jesus went to an isolated place to pray, he probably brought his phone with a Bible app on it and an app for K-Love and his favorite AM preachers and all that, so that entire time all by himself he could completely fill his head with more noise, even though it was good noise, right? To help him out. No. They didn't have a Bible back then. Well, they did, but they were in scrolls, and he wouldn't have been carrying one around. He had nothing, just himself, going to a quiet place to pray for the sake of being quiet. What was he doing? I suggest to you that what he was doing is what we're seeing Richard Rohr talk about this week in terms of cleansing the lens, of helping him see what he has owned from the culture around him that's telling him you got to be this way, and even what he's owned himself. And that reminds me. Hands are a little dry. You ever use this stuff? It's pretty good. Curel, Daily Moisture Therapy Lotion. Relieves and comforts dry skin. Well, we'll find out. Oh, yeah, that's nice. I need one more prop. Peyton, can I see your glasses for just a second? Now, the bad thing, if you've ever put lotion on your hands and tapped your phone or a screen or whatever, as soon as you do, wow, that's awful. Isn't it that awful? We have to...
Just like every day.
No dipper. There's an extra lens cleaner for you. You know, I think the way it works is this, that if we're not paying attention, if we're not doing the Jesus thing, if we're not paying attention to, are my lenses even clean, they will get dirty. They will get lotioned up. And we won't know it because some guy, some jerk in church isn't coming along and putting lotion on your lenses. It happens gradually over time. And then the only way you know that that's the case is either it's so bad that you can't see straight anymore, or you actually take them off and hold them up to the light and you realize, wow, I wonder how much better I'm going to see once I clean these things off. And I think that's exactly what Jesus was doing. He needed time away. How did he start his ministry, by the way? He gets baptized and immediately he's away alone for 40 days. Alone. No cable TV, no internet, no nothing. Just alone. Why? Because he needed to sort out who he was in relation to what everybody was telling him he needed to be. Does that speak to you, by the way? Do you have anybody that has an idea for who you should be? Then maybe you need some time alone to think about that. But not just that, he also had to come to grips with his own lens about who he was projecting on himself that he needed to be. He needed to be quiet, to listen for God, to allow God room to speak, to breathe deep. Remember about a month ago, we were in the courtyard, and I had you do an exercise where all I wanted you to do was breathe deeply, sit there in silence for a full minute. Some of you literally were pulling your hair out in 15 seconds. Because we're so unaccustomed to just being still and quiet. You know why? Because as soon as we close our eyes and there's nothing to listen to, nothing to focus on, we just get bombarded with all these ideas in our head, all this stuff we got to do, the to-do list. And sometimes if we get rid of the to-do list, then all of a sudden we start thinking about some deeper things in life, maybe a conversation we've had or a conflict that we've had, and it's not a pretty place. And sometimes if we're quiet enough, some of the even harder stuff starts to come up. Pain, loss, fears, doubts. And we never get there if we keep the noise going all the time. Jesus cleansed his lens. Are you in any way fixing quiet into your life? Real quiet. No Christian radio, no TV preacher, radio preacher. Not even a devotional. That's another place for a different kind of thing. Just to be quiet. There are even apps for this to help build yourself up so that you can handle 10 minutes of quiet. You know what will happen if you do this? Other religious traditions do this, by the way. It's not just a Christian thing. You know what's going to happen if you do this? Your health is going to probably improve. You're probably going to see your blood pressure go down. Your mental clarity, your mental acuity is going to rise. Probably your heart rate is going to go down. There is good reason to learn what Jesus did, and it just might save your life. Related to this is what Richard Rohr talks about on the next screen. Let's check it out. So he says the discernment process, this discernment process, getting away in quiet process, is often called the third eye or third ear. It refers to the ability to stand away from ourselves and listen and look with some kind of calm, not judgmental objectivity. Most people become their thoughts. Could you just say that out loud with me? Most people become their thoughts. They do not have thoughts and feelings. The thoughts and feelings have them. So we start with wiping the mirror until we can see what is objectively there. But let's go further than that. Wiping the mirror until even the eye that is watching the mirror is not taken too seriously. Before making judgments, we have to clean the lens and get our own hurts and agenda and ego out of the way. So it could be that something happened in your life and you took a message home with you that you shouldn't have owned. If you're in an abusive relationship, maybe you're at a place where you're starting to own the lie that's being told to you, that it's your fault, that you're the reason that you're worthless, you're small. Maybe something terrible happened to you, you felt powerless, so you actually owned the word, I'm powerless, when there was nothing you could do. Well, until you objectively look at it, and sometimes you need a counselor, therapist to help you see it in a new way because you're just not going to think about it that way. I've been there, by the way. Have you ever had that experience where somebody with insight, here's the same story. You've been looking at this thing perhaps for years, and all of a sudden somebody comes who can be objective because they're not in your junk. And they hear the story and they look at stuff and they say, well, you know, Pete, don't you see this variable over here? Because that was going on. And you're like, what? No way. And you look at it and all of a sudden the sky's open because you never realized what message you were owning. And by the way, you all have messages that are owning you because you were all raised by human beings. Correct? Yes? Okay. And because you were all raised by human beings and not by wolves or aliens, that humanity comes across. You've all got stuff. You all have been influenced. How you see the world, how you see yourself. Here's the good news. You don't have to do anything with this. If you don't want to deal with it, okay, that is your option. But I'm going to guarantee you this. I've said it before many times over the years. If you don't deal with your stuff, rest assured, your stuff will deal with you. Jesus made sure he was dealing with his stuff. To listen to the voices of yesteryear. I see this often with men in a group where I see this played out even stronger, where somehow the message was communicated to a little boy that the only way he got approval or love from his dad was if he succeeded at something, if he achieved something. It's like the only time dad thought to say anything was, hey, congratulations. He never realized that congratulations in the absence of anything else was actually setting his kid up to hear a lesson that the only way I am worthy is if I achieve. And there are a whole lot of men that are emotionally, ill-equipped to even see this and to raise our own kids differently. And so my hunch is, out of all you guys here, my hunch is that you have dealt with this in some degree. My hunch is that some of you here may not even realize that that's something going on in your head. And it's been dealing with you your whole life. You wonder if you're worth anything because your career didn't quite go the way you thought it was. Your kids didn't quite turn out the way you thought they would. The marriage didn't turn out the way you thought you did. You didn't have as much money in the bank as you thought you should. All these things, achievement-based, that are messing with your identity. That's real stuff, and your stuff is dealing with you. Until you have quiet to get away and look at it objectively, it is going to continue to be your master. The next slide, he goes just a little step further. He says, the wounds to our ego are our teachers and must be welcomed. They must be paid attention to, not litigated, not excused away, not getting away from it. A contemplative posture faces reality and sees the presence of God. So there's ultimately nothing to fear. True religion is never about fear. It is always about moving beyond fear. And this gets tricky for us because some of us look at some of the things that have happened in our lives, from fairly innocent things that parents do to form us in ways that we wish we hadn't been formed, to horrific things that happen to us. And we want to litigate, we want to get it out of the way, and we think to ourselves, there's no way God was a part of that. And you know what? You're right. There's going to come a day when my kids, Noah and Lakin, sit me down. I hope, anyway, that they're honest with me enough. Maybe it'll be when they start to have kids. And we'll have conversation after dinner, and they'll just give Lynn and I insight into how we raised them. What did you hear? Where did we miss the mark? And they probably are, can't even see it now, so it's going to take some time for them to get it. And we're going to hear how that was. And it would be a terrible thing for me to say? Well, that's just how God wanted it. Because it's not. You know how God wants me to raise my kids? The best I can, with as much love as possible. Here's reality. I have already blown it. I'm going to blow it again. Not willingly, not because I want to, but because I'm a human being and my lens is messed up too. The pain that you went through, the stuff that you went through, not God's idea. The idea of God controlling every variable so that every horrific act that happens to you and every horrific act that you do to yourself is erroneous. That's bad theology. That's bad biblical interpretation. I can help walk you through that. So when we look at that and say, how in the world could God have been in that? You've got to separate the two things out. This thing happened, which does not reflect the grace and the love of God. But here's the thing. Unless you objectively get yourself over here and look at this and actually say, well, how can God speak to me through this event that did happen and has shaped me? Until you do that, it has you. It owns you. And it will continue to own you until you do that work. You see the difference between the two things? That's choosing who's in control. And if you don't even know where you're out of control, well, now you know what your first step is. How has my lens been formed? By the way, Jesus talks about this stuff quite at length, because when hard stuff happens, we tend to shy away from it. It's sort of a evolutionary principle that we go the path of least resistance, don't we? So if there's an emotionally challenging thing that we feel like we're supposed to go through, oftentimes, even though it's very good for us, we don't do it because we want the path of ease and comfort. And if difficult stuff is put in front of our face, we will not only reject it, we'll get away from it, we'll even go so far as to say God cannot be in it. So one day Jesus is talking to the boys and he says, "Hey guys, just out of curiosity, who do people think that I am?" And they all retort different things. Maybe you're John the Baptist reincarnated. Maybe you're Elijah reincarnated. Not quite sure. And then finally Peter raises his hand and says, "Got it. You're the Messiah. You're the one we've been waiting for all this time." Messiah means anointed one by God. And so Jesus says, "Peter, you nailed it. Congratulations. This belief that I've been anointed by God, I'm going to build this whole thing on. So well done, man. Good job. Gates of the kingdom are yours. So whatever you loose on heaven's loosed on earth, etc., etc." Well, then in the very next scene, he tells the guys the game plan. He says, "Guys, this is where we're going." It's toward the kind of the middle of his life, maybe got a year to go or so. And he says, "Okay, so we're going to go back toward Jerusalem, which you and I know is hostile territory. They don't like us there. They kind of want to see me dead. And it's not going to go well. I know you're thinking that I was going to be kind of riding in on a chariot and kicking some butt, but that's not how it's going to go down. We're going to go in there, they're going to have their way, and the Son of Man is going to die. Me, Jesus, is going to die." Well, they hear this. And Peter, who's always quick to put his foot in his mouth, raises his hand and says, "Far be it from this, Lord. There is no way we're going to Jerusalem. You don't know what you're talking about," is basically what Peter was saying. And at that point, Jesus goes up to Peter and he says, "Peter, get behind me, Satan." Calls him Satan. Says, "Because you do not have in mind the things of God, but you have in mind the things of men." We cannot imagine that the thing we think is unimaginable could be something God could work with. The idea that their Messiah would be killed was preposterous. There's nowhere that people really believed that that kind of thing was what was supposed to happen. There are passages of the suffering servant in Isaiah, but that's talking about the people of Israel. And only later after this did we say, "Oh, well, we do see how God can work through brokenness," but our initial inclination is, there's no way this is true. And yet Jesus knew this is exactly what he was headed for. He was not going to go for success by the eyes of the world, but he was going to show that even through death, God was still in the mix. And that something profound was going to happen, even though he was going to be killed in the most torturous way possible. We don't like that. After he explains that we're going to go forward anyway, then he puts a call out to the disciple and he said, "Guys, here's the deal. If you want to hold on to your life, this life, the way you see it, you're going to lose it. But if you trust me with your life, you'll find it. Hold on to your little way of thinking, you're going to lose the very life you love so much. Trust me with your life, and you will find it." And then he ends with this little hook. "Now, pick up your cross and follow me." Now, Jesus had a literal cross, something like that one on stage. I wonder what your cross looks like. Maybe your cross is some horrible thing that happened to you as a kid. Maybe your cross is a horrible thing you did. Maybe your cross is, I never got over being the high school football star, or the cheerleader, or the tennis star, or the swimming star, or whatever. Maybe your cross to bear and understand that God is going to join you even on that effort is your divorce, or the death of your spouse, or the illness that you're facing, your sense of self that is not healthy or good, but you keep it under wraps because you don't want anybody to know how broken you really are. What is your cross to bear? We don't know until we take time to see it for ourselves. You know, the crazy thing about this in the story Up is Carl had done so much to keep his life in order that he didn't have time, true time, to be quiet, to just listen and reflect. And it turns out that only when he was quiet and alone did he actually see a message that had been there all along. Take a look at the next clip, and I'll be back with you. Oh, crank the volume pretty good on this. It's quiet. I have done what was mine to do. Now you must do what is yours to do. This communion table, we're going to have some background music in here in a second, represents something very pertinent to our conversation. This bread, what you're going to have in a moment, I'm going to invite somebody from your table to come up and grab it. This bread represents the broken body of Christ, something that nobody saw coming. Nobody saw coming. Nobody had any idea that the Messiah was going to die the way that he did, because they thought that would be the evidence of the absence of God. But brokenness actually showed the profound nature of God's incarnation in Jesus, that God was actually fully present the whole time. The cup, which is the symbol of the shed blood of Jesus, again, is another symbol for us to focus on the death of Jesus. Not to look away from it, not to ignore it, but to embrace that even in this state of death that we remember, God is there. In your states of death that you live with right now, the parts of you that you don't want to deal with, you'd rather push under the rug, God is in there. So I invite someone from your table to come and grab one of these and go back to your table, and we're going to do this together, so wait for my instruction. Okay, so the way we do it, and you can go ahead and do this now if you like, and just hold on to it, is you dip the bread in the juice, and just hold on. If it goes on the tablecloth, no big deal. Pull up the next screen for me, Chris, if you would. This is a passage from Paul. He was a big deal in the early church. He wrote this to the Corinthian church. What you must solemnly realize is that every time you eat this bread and every time you drink this cup, you reenact in your words and actions the death of the Master. You remember that God was in the death. That's a crazy surprise. You will be drawn back to this meal again and again until the Master returns. In other words, it's not going away. For the rest of your life, this symbol endures, that God is in even the death, even in the death you experience. You must never let familiarity breed contempt. So don't forget it. Don't get so casual with this that you forget its power. Anyone who eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Master irreverently is like part of the crowd that jeered and spit on him at his death. Is that the kind of remembrance you want to be a part of? Examine your motives. Test your heart. Come to this meal in holy awe that God was in the death of Jesus, and God is even in the death you've experienced. On the next slide, it continues. If you give no thought, or worse, don't care, about the broken body of the Master when you eat and drink, you're running the risk of serious consequences. That's why so many of you, even now, are listless and sick, and others have gone to an early grave. If we get this straight now, we won't have to be straightened out later on. Now, I'm not sure what Paul's getting at here. Perhaps Paul, like I say, is expressing more than a primitive view of God punishing people for their sins, because that could be all that Paul's saying. sees a cause and effect thing. You ticked God off, and here comes the lightning bolt. But you know, at other parts of Paul's teaching, I think he may be speaking of a greater depth that we can appreciate more now than they could possibly back then. Because here's what I do know, that when we leave stuff unattended, sometimes it leads us to be in great pain. And we deal with that pain by drinking, by drugs, food, violence. Sometimes we ignore it and we stuff it down so we don't have to deal with the death in our lives that we carry with us all over the place. And that creates literal illness in us. Hypertension leads to heart conditions, sets us up for a weak immune system, which who knows what that could lead to. Could it be that reflection on brokenness, trusting that God is even in the death, might actually heal us? I think so. You have before you an invitation to say to God, I believe that you are even in the death. The horrible deaths I've experienced, just as you were, and the death of Jesus on a cross. So what does this bread represent to you? Can you see this bread and say, I own that God is even in the brokenness, even in my brokenness. God is there. He has not left me. And maybe for you it's the cup, because the cup represents blood, and maybe right now you are bleeding somewhere in your life. It is an open wound. It is not healed up. But where you're bleeding is where God is, where God invites you to heal you. So take the bread, take the cup, and eat it as a sign of being with God even in your pain. Join me in prayer. God, this is still a surprise 2,000 years forward. And it will always be, because we don't want to hang out at the funeral home. We don't want to hang out at the hospital. We want to be well and on with our lives, and we think that if we rush it or ignore it, somehow it's going to work, but it doesn't. And communion reminds us that where we would least expect you to be, you're there in all of your power and all of your strength to help us heal, to help us move forward. So whatever our respective deaths are that we experience here this morning, God, I ask that your Spirit touch us. Give us courage to go back and look, to find out what messages were spoken to us through those series of events, what message we owned that really wasn't from you. And even take a look at ourselves and our own biases and judgments that also create a filter that we cannot even hear what you're trying to say. Take our hand through the valley of the shadow of death, into our pain, into our struggle, that we might be truly free, that we may truly live. I ask this in the name of Jesus. Amen.